I'll defend my daddy in court. Emeka Okonkwo looked up from the papers on his desk and blinked. Then he leaned back in his chair and laughed softly. Ada, he said, shaking his head. Who told you to say that? No one, she replied. Emeka studied her, amused despite the heavy tension that had filled the Okonkwo family compound for weeks. You sure? He asked. Because that sounds like something a lawyer would say. I just thought of it. Emeka chuckled again and rubbed his eyes. Well, he said gently, I appreciate the loyalty, but you are a little too small to defend anyone in court. I am not small. You are 6. That is not small. Emeka smiled despite himself. Before we begin, remember this. While the story you're about to hear is fictional, the message behind it is very real. At Zara Tales, we believe the right story at the right moment can change a life. On Emeka's desk sat a stack of legal files, affidavits, witness statements, evidence submissions. Tomorrow morning, he would walk into the Lagos High Court and face accusations that had already begun spreading through business news and society gossip. His wife, Chisom Okonkwo, had accused him of infidelity. The accusation had come only days after Emeka filed for divorce. And somehow, within hours, photographs had appeared. Witnesses had appeared. Stories had appeared. Emeka suspected manipulation, but suspicion was not proof. Ada climbed into the leather chair across from his desk, her feet swinging slightly above the floor. Emeka folded his hands together. All right, he said playfully. Let us hear it. Ada tilted her head. Hear what? If you are defending me in court, Emeka said, smiling, you must have a plan. Ada nodded immediately. I do. Emeka raised an eyebrow. Oh, really? Yes. How exactly are you planning to defend me? Ada reached into her pocket and pulled out an old phone. Emeka frowned slightly. That is the old phone I gave you for games. Yes. And that is your courtroom strategy? Ada nodded again. I have evidence. Emeka leaned back slowly. Evidence? She held up the phone. A recording? Emeka's smile faded. A recording of what? Ada pressed a button. I will show you. Before Emeka could respond, the tiny speaker crackled. Then 2 voices filled the quiet office. The first voice was Chisom's. Unmistakable. If the judge believes Emeka cheated, Chisom said on the recording, the divorce settlement will crush him. Emeka froze. The second voice followed immediately. Chukwudi Okonkwo, Emeka's younger brother. Relax, Chukwudi said. The fake girlfriend story is solid. Emeka's fingers slowly tightened against the edge of his desk. On the recording, Chisom laughed softly. I still cannot believe that actress agreed to testify. She was expensive, Chukwudi replied, but worth it. Daniel's fingers slowly tightened against the edge of his desk. On the recording, Chukwudi continued. Once the court believes Emeka had an affair, his reputation collapses. Investors panic. The board turns against him. Chisom's voice returned. And I get half of Okonkwo Holdings. Chukwudi chuckled. And I finally get control of the rest. The room fell silent as the recording ended. For several seconds, Emeka did not move. He sat completely still in the leather chair, staring at nothing. Then he whispered, play it again. Ada pressed the button. Chisom and Chukwudi's voices rang out again, calmly discussing the destruction of Emeka Okonkwo's life. When the recording ended again, Emeka leaned back slowly, running a hand across his mouth. He felt like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. Chisom's betrayal had already shattered his marriage. But hearing his own brother calmly plotting his downfall, that was something else entirely. Ada slipped her hand into her pocket again. I have more. Emeka looked up. She placed 3 photographs on the desk. They were slightly crooked, clearly taken by small hands trying not to be noticed. In the first photo, Chisom and Chukwudi stood close together in the kitchen late at night. In the second, Chukwudi's hand rested on Chisom's waist. In the third, they were laughing together beside the kitchen island. Emeka stared at the images. Then he leaned back again, exhaling slowly. For years, he had trusted Chukwudi, defended him, helped him when his business ventures failed, brought him into family gatherings. And all that time, Chukwudi had been waiting for the right moment to take everything. Emeka looked back at Ada. How did you get these? I used your tablet for the photos. I was in the hallway, Ada said. They did not know. Emeka closed his eyes for a moment. The city outside continued its endless movement, but inside the office, everything felt very still. Finally, he opened his eyes again. Ada, yes. You understand this is very serious, right? She nodded. That is why I said I would defend you. Emeka let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh. You are 6 years old. But I have the truth. Emeka looked at her again. There was no fear in her eyes. Just certainty. Across the room, the office door opened quietly. Mama Ngozi stepped inside carrying a tray. Dinner is. She stopped when she saw Emeka's face. What happened? Emeka gestured toward the phone. My 6-year-old just handed me the key to my entire divorce case. Mama Ngozi raised her eyebrows. Well, she said calmly. I always did say that child was observant. Emeka rubbed his forehead. Observant is one thing. He looked back at Ada. But defending me in court? Ada zipped her backpack closed and stood up. I can do it. Emeka shook his head gently. No, sweetheart. Why not? Because tomorrow that courtroom will be full of lawyers who studied the law for years. Ada looked up at him. But they do not know the truth. Emeka felt something tighten in his chest. He stood up and walked around the desk. Then he knelt beside her. Listen to me, he said softly. I am grateful you want to help. Ada nodded. But no matter what happens tomorrow, he brushed a curl from her forehead. You remember something? What? Emeka smiled faintly. Family is not something you inherit. He tapped the purple backpack resting against her leg. It is something you choose to protect. Ada looked at the phone once more. Inside that phone was the truth. And tomorrow morning, in a courtroom full of powerful adults, that truth was going to explode. That night, long after Ada went upstairs, Emeka Okonkwo remained alone in his office. The compound had grown quiet. Emeka sat behind his desk, staring at nothing. But his mind was not empty. It kept returning to one small detail, the phone in Ada's pocket. When she had stood in front of him earlier, the phone had been tucked into the front pocket of her jeans, barely noticeable. Just an old device he had once given her to play games when she was bored. And yet inside that phone was a recording that could destroy 2 people. Chisholm. Chukwudi. Emeka leaned back slowly and closed his eyes. The voices came back instantly. If the judge believes Emeka cheated, the divorce settlement will crush him. Chisholm's voice. Chukwudi's reply followed in Emeka's memory just as clearly as if the recording were playing again. Relax. The fake girlfriend story is solid. Emeka's jaw tightened. Fake girlfriend. Expensive actress. Courtroom testimony. A lie carefully designed to look like truth. He opened his eyes and stared at the photographs lying on the desk. Ada had taken them with his tablet. The images were slightly crooked, the angle uneven. A child's hands had clearly held the camera, but the meaning was unmistakable. Chisholm standing close to Chukwudi in the kitchen. Chukwudi's hand on her waist, both of them laughing like they were sharing a private victory. Emeka picked up one of the photos and studied it again. The timestamp glowed faintly in the corner. 2 nights ago, while he had been upstairs finishing a conference call with investors, while Ada had been down the hallway listening. Emeka set the photo down again. For years, he had believed betrayal would feel dramatic if it ever arrived. Explosive, violent, impossible to miss. But the reality was quieter. It was the slow realization that people you trusted had been standing beside you while secretly measuring the distance to your fall. Emeka pushed back from the desk and walked toward the window. Victoria Island stretched beneath him, glowing with lights from the estates, the hotels, the high-rises reaching toward the dark Lagos sky. 5 years ago, he had built this compound after Okonkwo Holdings went public. At the time, Chisholm had insisted on renovation. New furniture, imported marble floors, a kitchen fit for entertaining guests. Emeka had agreed without argument. Now the compound felt different. Not like a home. More like a stage where someone had been rehearsing a lie. He exhaled slowly. Chisholm's anger when he filed for divorce had been immediate. But what had shocked him was how fast the accusations followed. Within days, she had filed court documents claiming Emeka had been unfaithful. Within days, photographs had appeared. Within days, a woman Emeka had never seen before had come forward, claiming she had been in a relationship with him. At the time, Emeka had assumed desperation. Now he understood. Planning. He could hear Chukwudi's voice again. The fake girlfriend story is solid. Emeka closed his eyes. His younger brother had always been charming, always good with people, always just irresponsible enough that Emeka ended up helping him more times than he could count. When Chukwudi's business failed 3 years ago, Emeka had quietly paid off the debt. When Chukwudi asked to return to Lagos, Emeka had offered him a room in the compound. Family, Emeka had believed, deserved patience. Now the word felt bitter. Behind him, the office door opened softly. Mama Ngozi stepped inside carrying 2 mugs of tea. "You are still awake," she said. Emeka turned slightly. "I doubt sleep is coming tonight." Mama Ngozi placed 1 mug on the desk beside the photographs. Her eyes moved over the images without surprise. "Those are the ones Ada took." Emeka nodded. "She also recorded them." Mama Ngozi folded her arms. "That child notices everything." Emeka picked up the mug but did not drink. She overheard Chisom and Chukwudi talking. Mama Ngozi nodded slowly. "Sometimes the truth does not arrive from where we expect it," she said. Emeka looked toward the staircase. "Do you think she understood what she heard?" Mama Ngozi considered the question. "Children do not always understand the details," she said. "But they understand when something is wrong." Emeka nodded slowly. In his mind, he saw Ada standing in the doorway earlier that evening, small, serious, the phone hidden in her pocket. "I will defend my daddy in court." Emeka shook his head slightly. "She actually thinks she can help." Mama Ngozi smiled faintly. "Maybe she already has." Emeka glanced at the desk again. The photographs, the recording, evidence he had not even known existed, and all of it discovered by a 6-year-old who had simply been walking down the hallway at the right moment. Mama Ngozi lifted her mug. "You should try to get some rest." Emeka stared out the window again. "I keep hearing their voices." Mama Ngozi did not ask which ones. She knew. If the judge believes Emeka cheated, the fake girlfriend story is solid. Emeka turned back to the desk. "Tomorrow, the courtroom will be full of lawyers," he said quietly. "But the truth has been sitting in my daughter's pocket this whole time." Mama Ngozi nodded. "Funny how that works." Emeka sat down again and carefully gathered the photographs. Then he picked up his phone and dialed. Barrister Sohn Adeyemi answered after 2 rings. Barrister Sohn Adeyemi speaking. "Sohn," Emeka said calmly. "We need to talk." "You sound serious." "I have evidence." A pause. "What kind of evidence?" Emeka looked down at the small phone Ada had left on the desk earlier before going upstairs. Inside that phone was the recording. Inside that recording were Chisom and Chukwudi calmly discussing the destruction of his life. Emeka spoke quietly. The kind that might change everything. Upstairs, Ada lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Her hands rested on the blanket, but the phone was still in the pocket of her jeans, hanging over the chair beside the bed. Inside it, the recording waited silently. Ada closed her eyes. Tomorrow there would be a courtroom. Tomorrow, adults would argue about things she did not fully understand. But Ada understood one thing very clearly. Someone had lied about her daddy, and she was going to help fix it. Morning came slowly over Victoria Island. Grey light filtered through the tall windows of the Okonkwo compound, turning the polished wooden floors pale and quiet. The city outside had already begun its daily rhythm. Delivery trucks rumbling along the road, distant car horns, the low hum of the generator kicking in. But inside the compound, the morning carried a different kind of tension. Emeka had barely slept. He had fallen into bed sometime after 3 in the morning. But his mind had refused to shut down. Every time he closed his eyes, the same voices returned. Chisom. Chukwudi. The words echoed like a recording that refused to stop. Emeka sat at the kitchen table now, a mug of coffee cooling in front of him. His suit jacket hung neatly over the back of the chair, and the morning newspaper lay folded beside his phone. The headline caught his attention immediately. Tech mogul's marriage scandal heads to Lagos High Court. Emeka exhaled slowly and pushed the paper aside. Across the kitchen, Mama Ngozi moved quietly between the stove and the counter, preparing breakfast with the same calm rhythm she had used for years. Eggs, bread, coffee. Routine had always been her answer to chaos. "You should eat something," Mama Ngozi said without turning around. Emeka gave a faint smile. "That obvious? You have been staring at that coffee for 10 minutes. Emeka took a sip. It had gone cold. "Barrister Sohn is meeting me at the courthouse at 9, he said. Mama Ngozi nodded. You told him about the recording? Yes. And he wants to hear it himself before we decide how to present it. Mama Ngozi placed a plate of scrambled eggs in front of him. Smart man. Emeka nodded absently. His thoughts drifted upstairs to Ada. For the first time since she had arrived in his life 5 years earlier, she would be walking into a courtroom. The idea unsettled him more than the accusations. Children were not meant to see the machinery of adult conflict. They were not meant to watch trust collapse under legal arguments and sworn testimony. Footsteps echoed from the staircase. Emeka looked up. Ada appeared in the doorway, her hair slightly messy from sleep. She wore jeans and a small grey top, and her sandals were only half-strapped. Morning, she said. Emeka's face softened instantly. Morning, kiddo. She climbed into the chair beside him. Mama Ngozi placed a plate in front of her. Eat, Mama Ngozi said gently. Ada picked up a piece of bread and dipped it into her eggs. For a moment, the three of them sat in silence. Then Ada looked at Emeka. Is today the court day? Emeka nodded. Yes. She chewed thoughtfully. Are the people who lied about you going to be there? Yes. Ada nodded slowly, as if confirming something in her mind. Emeka watched her carefully. You do not have to come with me, he said. Mama Ngozi can take you to school instead. Ada shook her head immediately. I want to go. Emeka sighed. Courtrooms are boring. That is okay. Lots of talking. That is okay too. Emeka leaned closer. Sometimes adults say things that do not make sense. Ada swallowed the last bite of bread. I know. Emeka studied her face. She looked calm. Too calm. Ada, he said gently. About what you said yesterday. I meant it. Emeka smiled faintly. He reached for his jacket. Let us go, then. The courtroom was waiting. 20 minutes later, they stepped outside into the warm Lagos morning. The black car waited at the gate. Emeka opened the passenger door for Ada. She climbed in. As the car pulled into traffic, Emeka stared out the window at the city rushing past. Tall buildings, roadside stalls, people walking quickly in the morning heat. Normal life, ordinary movement. Yet somewhere across the island, a courtroom was waiting. A courtroom where his reputation would be dismantled piece by piece if Chisholm's story held. Emeka felt Ada's small hand slip into his. He looked down. She was staring straight ahead through the windshield. Serious. Focused. Dad, she said. Yes. Don't worry. Emeka smiled faintly. I will try. Ada squeezed his hand. I told you already. Emeka raised an eyebrow. Told me what? That I will defend you. Emeka chuckled softly. You are very determined. Yes. The courthouse appeared ahead as the car turned onto the main road. A large, stone-fronted building rising above the busy street. Emeka felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle over him again. The weight of public scrutiny, lawyers and testimony, reputation and rumor. But beside him sat a 6-year-old girl who believed none of that mattered as much as the truth. The car stopped. Emeka stepped out first and walked around to Ada's side. He helped her onto the pavement. Journalists already gathered near the entrance. Cameras, microphones, curious faces. The whispers began immediately. That is him. Or Okonkwo. Where is his wife? Emeka ignored them. He took Ada's hand and guided her toward the courthouse doors. Inside, the air smelled of marble and old paper. Lawyers hurried down hallways carrying files. Voices echoed through the high ceilings. At the end of the corridor stood a tall man in a navy Agbada jacket over his suit trousers. Barrister Sohn Adeyemi, Emeka's attorney. Sohn turned as they approached. Emeka, he said, extending his hand. They shook. Sohn glanced down at Ada. And this must be Ada. She nodded politely. Good morning. Sohn smiled warmly. Good morning. Then his expression shifted. Emeka, he said quietly. Do you have the recording? Emeka looked down at Ada. She reached into her pocket slowly, carefully. Then she pulled out the phone. Sohn stared at it. That is it. Emeka nodded. That is the one. Sohn took the phone and looked at the screen. Well, he said softly. Let us hear it. And in that moment, none of them yet realized that within the next hour, a 6-year-old girl was about to change the direction of an entire courtroom. Barrister Sohn held the phone in one hand and stared at it as though it were a live wire. They were standing in a narrow consultation room just off the main corridor of Lagos High Court, a space with pale walls, fluorescent lights, and a long wooden table that had probably heard too many bad marriages explained badly. Outside, footsteps echoed across the marble floors. Doors opened and shut. Lawyers passed by speaking in low, urgent voices. But inside the room, everything narrowed to the old phone in Sohn's hand. He looked at Emeka first. "You are telling me this came from Ada?" Emeka nodded. Sohn turned toward the child standing beside the table. Ada had both hands clasped in front of her now. Her face was calm, though her eyes were watchful. She looked smaller in the harsh courthouse light than she had at home. Sohn's voice softened. "Ada, did you record this yourself?" "Yes, sir." "Do you know when you made it?" 2 nights ago." Sohn gave a short glance to Emeka, then tapped the screen. The recording began. Chisholm's voice came through first, thin and metallic through the small speaker, but unmistakable. "If the judge believes Emeka cheated, the divorce settlement will crush him." Sohn's expression changed immediately. Chikwede's voice followed, smug and relaxed. "Relax. The fake girlfriend's story is solid." No one in the room moved. Emeka watched Sohn carefully. He had spent most of the night imagining this moment, wondering whether hearing the recording in a courthouse would make it feel more real or less. It did not do either. It simply made the betrayal sound official. The recording played on. Chisholm laughed. "I still cannot believe that actress agreed to testify." "She was expensive," Chikwede said, "but worth it." When the recording ended, the room went silent. Sohn lowered the phone slowly. "Well," he said at last, "that changes things." Emeka exhaled for what felt like the first time in minutes. Sohn looked back at Ada. "And those pictures your father mentioned?" Ada looked at Emeka for permission. He nodded. She reached into her coat pocket this time and pulled out the 3 photographs, slightly bent at the corners. Sohn laid them out on the table one by one. Chisholm and Chikwede in the kitchen. Chisholm and Chikwede standing too close. Chikwede's hand around her waist. Sohn studied each picture with the quick precision of a man trained to separate emotion from usefulness. Then he looked up. "Emeka, did anyone else have access to the compound that night? No security cameras?" Emeka frowned. "Exterior only." Chisholm insisted she did not want indoor cameras. Sohn muttered. "Of course she did." He tapped the photographs with one finger. "These help. The recording is the bigger weapon." Emeka folded his arms. "Can we use it?" Sohn hesitated. "There are 2 questions. First, can we authenticate it? Second, how does the judge react to a recording made by a 6-year-old in the middle of a domestic dispute?" Emeka's jaw tightened. "It is real." "I know it is real," Sohn said. "The law and the truth are related, Emeka. But they are not twins." Ada listened carefully, her eyes moving from one man to the other. Then she asked, "Does that mean the truth might not help?" Both men looked at her. Sohn gave a tired half-smile. "It means we need to be smart about how we use it." Before Ada could answer, someone knocked on the door. A clerk stepped in. "Barrister Adeyemi, they are ready in court 4. Sohn nodded. "We will be there in a minute." The clerk disappeared again. Sohn turned to Emeka. "Here is what we do. Chisholm's attorney is going to open with the affair narrative. They will present the witness, the photographs, and probably try to establish a pattern of deception. I will push back, but I do not want to reveal this recording too early unless I have to." Emeka frowned. "You are waiting." "I am choosing timing," Sohn said. "There is a difference." He glanced down at Ada. "For now, she stays with Mama Ngozi in the waiting room. I do not want her in that courtroom unless it becomes absolutely necessary." Ada straightened at once. "I should stay with Daddy." Emeka knelt in front of her before Sohn could answer. "Listen to me," he said gently. "You have already helped more than you know. But what if they lie again?" Emeka held her shoulders lightly. "They probably will." Ada's face tightened. "Then I should be there." Emeka felt something twist in his chest. There it was again, that impossible mixture of childhood and courage. "Maybe later," he said softly. "But not at the beginning." She did not like that answer. He could see it. After a moment, she nodded once. Sohn checked his watch. "We have to move." They stepped back into the corridor together. The courthouse was more crowded now. Journalists clustered near the elevators, hoping for a glimpse of scandal. Two older women sitting on a bench whispered to each other as Emeka passed. A man in a dark coat openly stared. Public disgrace had a way of turning strangers into spectators. At the far end of the hall stood Chisom Okonkwo. She wore cream-colored lace, understated and expensive, with her hair swept neatly back, her face carefully composed for court. Beside her stood Chukwudi, lean and dressed in a sharp grey suit, looking every inch the concerned brother forced into an ugly family matter. Emeka stopped walking. For a moment, the hallway seemed to narrow. Chisom met his gaze first. There was no shame in her face, only calculation. Chukwudi slipped one hand into his pocket and gave Emeka the faintest smile. The kind men use when they believe the outcome is already decided. Emeka looked from one to the other and thought, not anymore. Chisom's attorney, Barristress Valerie Obi, stepped toward them with a folder in hand. Mr. Okonkwo, she said coolly. Miss Obi. Her eyes dropped briefly to Ada, then back to Emeka. I trust there will not be any theatrics today. Sohn answered before Emeka could. Not from our side. Valerie gave him a thin smile and walked on. Chisom bent toward Ada as Emeka moved past. You look very pretty this morning, she said, as if they were meeting at a school recital instead of a courthouse. Ada said nothing. Chukwidi's gaze flicked toward the child and then away. Dismissive. Careless. Emeka leaned slightly toward Chisom. That was a mistake, he said quietly. Chisom's smile did not move. I have no idea what you mean. Chukwudi let out a soft breath through his nose, almost a laugh. Sohn touched Emeka's arm. Not here. Emeka stepped back. A court officer appeared and motioned them toward the courtroom doors. Mama Ngozi, who had arrived a few minutes behind them, came forward just then and took Ada's hand. I will stay right here with her, she told Emeka. He nodded gratefully, though it cost him something to let go of Ada's shoulder. She looked up at him. Dad, if they say bad things, do not believe them. For a second, the noise of the corridor faded. Emeka managed to smile. I will not. Then the courtroom doors opened. Inside, the room was already filling. Dark wood, high ceilings, the national crest behind the bench. Rows of polished pews where journalists and curious spectators leaned forward with sharpened attention. At the front, 2 tables waited beneath the judge's empty chair. Emeka walked beside Sohn toward the defense table and took his seat. Across the aisle, Chisom and Chukwudi sat with Barristress Valerie Obi, arranging papers with the calm confidence of people who believed they were about to tell the winning story. Sohn sat down his briefcase and leaned toward Emeka. Let them start, he murmured. Let them get comfortable. Emeka kept his eyes on the far table. The recording was still in Sohn's inside pocket. Chisom did not know that. Chukwudi did not know that. And somewhere outside that room, a 6-year-old girl waited with the simple certainty that truth ought to matter. A side door opened. The bailiff called the room to order. And as Justice Folake Adesanya stepped onto the bench, Emeka Okonkwo understood that the real battle was beginning now. Justice Folake Adesanya settled into her chair and adjusted her glasses with the composed efficiency of a woman who had spent 20 years watching people lie under oath. The bailiff called for silence. The room obeyed. Emeka sat very still at the defense table, hands folded, expression controlled. He had learned long ago that composure was a form of armor. In boardrooms, it reassured investors. In negotiations, it unsettled opponents. In a courtroom, he hoped it would at least keep him from looking like a man whose wife and younger brother had tried to destroy him. Across the aisle, Chisom sat with her spine straight and her face arranged into a portrait of subdued injury. She wore grief the way she wore expensive lace, tailored, flattering, designed to be noticed without seeming to ask for attention. Chukwudi sat beside her, looking grave in the practiced way of men who believed solemnity could pass for sincerity. Justice Adesanya opened the file in front of her. We are here in the matter of Okonkwo versus Okonkwo, she said. Counsel, I expect efficiency, professionalism, and relevance. This court is not interested in spectacle. Is that understood? Yes, my lord, both attorneys answered. Barristress Valerie Obi rose first. She moved to the center of the courtroom with a file in one hand, and the confidence of someone who had rehearsed every syllable of what she was about to say. Your lordship, she began. This is a case about betrayal. My client, Chisom Okonkwo, entered her marriage in good faith, supported her husband through the rise of his company, helped build a household and a family, and only recently discovered that Mr. Okonkwo had been engaged in a sustained extramarital affair. She paused, letting the words settle over the room. In the gallery, a reporter lowered his pen just enough to look more closely at Emeka. Valerie continued. This betrayal did not merely destroy a marriage. It humiliated my client publicly, destabilized her family privately, and revealed a pattern of deception that will be relevant to this court's consideration of the financial and custodial issues before it. Emeka kept his eyes forward. Deception. The word hit him with a peculiar kind of insult, coming from the wrong mouth. Valerie turned and gestured lightly toward Chisholm. Mrs. Okonkwo did not want this fight. But when a wife is confronted with infidelity, concealment, and dishonor, she has no choice but to seek justice. Sohn leaned toward Emeka and wrote on his legal pad, "Let her overplay it." Emeka gave the slightest nod. Valerie called her first witness. The woman who stepped forward looked exactly the way Emeka had imagined after hearing the recording the night before. Attractive, polished, and just nervous enough to seem believable. Mid-30s, dark dress, the face of someone carefully styled to look like she had not been carefully styled. She introduced herself as Natasha Ifemain. Emeka had never seen her in his life. She was sworn in and took her seat. Valerie approached with a sympathetic expression. "Miss Ifemain, how do you know Mr. Okonkwo?" Natasha lowered her eyes before answering. "We met at a charity dinner last year. After that, we started seeing each other." The words moved through the courtroom like a draft of cold air. Valerie softened her voice. "For how long?" "Almost 8 months." Emeka felt rather than saw the subtle shift in attention around the room. People were leaning in now. Not because the story was true, but because stories of betrayal always carried a kind of appetite. Valerie asked for details. Restaurants, hotels, texts described with emotional specificity. A weekend away that had never happened. Natasha delivered every line with the perfect balance of embarrassment and conviction. It was almost impressive. Emeka glanced toward the bench. Justice Adesanya's expression had not changed. That gave him a flicker of hope. Valerie then introduced photographs, the same ones Chisholm had already leaked to the press. Grainy images of Emeka seated at a restaurant table across from Natasha. One outside a hotel entrance. One blurry shot of them walking down a street. Valerie held up one photograph for the court. "Would you identify the individuals in this image?" Natasha folded her hands. "That is me," she said softly, "and Emeka." Valerie looked toward the judge. No further questions at this time. Sohn rose slowly. He took his time walking to the witness stand, not with theatrical arrogance, but with the quiet patience of a man who knew time itself could be a tool. "Miss Ifemain," he began pleasantly. "You say you met my client at a charity dinner last year?" "Yes." "Which one?" Natasha blinked. "The Children's Healthcare Foundation Gala." Sohn nodded as if encouraging her. "At the Echo Hotel." "Yes." Sohn smiled faintly. "That is unfortunate." Natasha shifted in her seat. "Why?" Sohn turned toward the judge. "Because, my lord, my client was not in Lagos on the date of that event. He was in Abuja delivering the keynote address at the Digital Transformation Summit. We have documentation, video recordings, and hotel records establishing that fact." For the first time, Natasha's composure slipped just slightly. Valerie rose at once. "My lord, counsel is testifying." Sohn did not look at her. "I am laying foundation for impeachment." Justice Adesanya nodded once. "Proceed." Sohn turned back to Natasha. "Would you like to revise your answer?" Natasha swallowed. "I may have the event wrong." "Of course," Sohn said gently. "Let us try another question. You testified you were involved with Mr. Okonkwo for 8 months. During that time, did he ever visit your home?" "Yes." "Where do you live?" Natasha hesitated. "Lekki." Sohn opened a folder. "Interesting, because the investigators' report your counsel disclosed lists your primary address as a flat on Amadu Bello Way, Victoria Island. Which address was he visiting?" Natasha's mouth parted, but no answer came immediately. In the second row of the gallery, someone shifted hard enough for the bench to creak. Valerie objected again, but it sounded thinner this time. Sohn continued, his tone still maddeningly polite. "Miss Ifemain, did anyone help you prepare your testimony today?" "My lawyer." No. Let me rephrase. Did anyone pay you to tell this story? Natasha looked instantly at Valerie. That was all Sohn needed. No further questions, he said. He returned to the table while a murmur rolled through the gallery. Justice Adesanya struck the gavel for order. Emeka kept his face expressionless. But inside, something had changed. It was small, but real. For the first time that morning, the narrative Chisholm had built showed its first visible crack. Valerie recovered quickly enough to redirect, smoothing over Natasha's inconsistencies with vague references to stress, memory, and trauma. But the rhythm was broken. The witness no longer sounded wounded. She sounded rehearsed. When Natasha stepped down, Chisholm took the stand. Emeka had expected this part to be harder. He was right. Chisholm looked at the judge with glassy eyes and measured restraint. She spoke of disappointment, of sleepless nights, of noticing Emeka growing distant, of phone calls taken in private and family dinners missed. It was a better performance than Natasha's, because some of it was built on truth. Emeka had grown distant, not because of an affair, but because the marriage had been dying in increments too small to name at first. Valerie guided her carefully. And when did you decide to file? Chisholm lowered her gaze. When I realized he was going to leave me and make it look like my fault. That lie landed harder than the others. Emeka felt it in his chest. Sohn put one hand flat on the table, a small signal. Stay still. Stay patient. Wait. Chisholm continued, now speaking of Ada in tones of maternal concern. I worried about what all this instability was doing to her. She is such a sensitive child. Emeka nearly laughed at the audacity. Chisholm had not attended a single parent-teacher meeting in 2 years. She forgot Ada's pediatrician's name twice last month. She treated the child with occasional polished affection, as if motherhood were another social role that mattered most in photographs. Still, she said it beautifully. That was the danger. A lie told clumsily collapses. A lie told elegantly can stand for years. By the time Chisholm stepped down for recess, the courtroom was heavy with conflicting impressions. Valerie had built her story. Sohn had weakened part of it. But the central accusation still hung in the air. As people began to rise, Justice Adesanya announced a 15-minute break. Emeka stayed seated. His shoulders were tight, his jaw sore from holding still. Sohn turned toward him. She is good, Emeka said quietly. She is practiced, Sohn replied. Emeka looked toward the back courtroom doors. Somewhere outside, Ada was waiting with Mama Ngozi. The truth was still not in this room. Not yet. Sohn followed his gaze. We may need the recording in the next session, he said. Emeka nodded once. At the far table, Chisholm leaned toward Chukwudi. Chukwudi murmured something in her ear, and the corner of her mouth lifted in the faintest suggestion of a smile. They still thought they were ahead. And for one more brief moment, they were. When the courtroom emptied for recess, Emeka remained seated for a moment longer, staring at the polished wood of the table in front of him. He could still hear Chisholm's voice in his head. I realized he was going to leave me and make it look like my fault. It was the kind of sentence that sounded true because it borrowed the shape of pain. That was what made Chisholm dangerous. She did not simply lie. She arranged lies so they resembled the emotional outline of reality. Enough truth at the edges. Enough injury in the tone. Enough restraint in the delivery. Across the aisle, Chisholm rose gracefully from her chair. Chukwudi stood beside her, leaning in to murmur something that made her mouth twitch into the faintest smile. Not triumph exactly, something more private. The satisfaction of people who believed they had bent the room in their direction. Sohn gathered a few files and placed them neatly into 2 stacks. Come on, he said quietly. Let us step outside. Emeka stood and followed him through the side door into the corridor. The hallway was crowded with motion and whispers. Journalists hovered near the stairwell, pretending not to stare. Clerks moved briskly with folders in hand. 2 older men in suits stood by a water fountain discussing some other case in low voices, their conversation halting as Emeka passed. At the far end of the hall, Mama Ngozi sat on a wooden bench with Ada beside her. The child looked up as soon as she saw Emeka. He felt his chest loosen at once. There was something almost absurd about it, the way a courtroom full of adults could make him feel more uncertain than the quiet sight of a 6-year-old waiting with her hands folded in her lap. Ada slid off the bench when he approached. How bad was it? She asked. Emeka managed a small smile. Straight to business. Ada nodded. Sohn answered before Emeka could. They told their story. We pushed back. Ada looked at him carefully. Did they lie? Sohn gave a soft huff of laughter. Yes. Then why are they still allowed to talk? That question landed harder than the adults around her would have guessed. Emeka knelt so he could look her in the eye. Because in court, he said gently, the truth sometimes takes time. Ada frowned. That does not seem fair. No, Emeka said. It does not. Mama Ngozi watched the exchange with quiet concern. She had dressed carefully that morning in a dark Ankara jacket, her expression composed, but Emeka knew her well enough to see the tension in the way she folded her hands. Sohn glanced down the corridor to make sure no one was close enough to hear. We need to talk about next steps. Emeka nodded. Sohn looked at Ada, then at Mama Ngozi. Not in front of the entire courthouse. Mama Ngozi rose immediately. I will take Ada to the waiting room. Ada looked displeased. I want to stay. Emeka hesitated. He hated the idea of shutting her out, especially now when she had already carried more truth than anyone else in the building. But she was still a child, no matter how steady her voice or clear her thinking. Just for a few minutes, he said. Ada's eyes narrowed slightly. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the old phone. She held it toward Emeka. In case you need it. Emeka took the phone. The weight of it felt strangely disproportionate in his hand. Light, scratched, outdated, and somehow carrying more consequence than every polished exhibit Chisholm's side had submitted that morning. He closed his fingers around it. Thank you. Ada studied his face for one more second, as if checking whether he truly understood what he held. Then she turned and let Mama Ngozi guide her down the hall. Sohn waited until they were out of earshot before speaking. We may not get a better opening than this next session. Emeka looked down at the phone. You think we use it now? Sohn said, I think Chisholm overcommitted. She put herself on the stand and wrapped the whole case in moral injury. That gives us room. Emeka glanced back toward the courtroom doors. What about admissibility? Sohn exhaled. We are not in criminal court. This is a divorce proceeding and judges have latitude. The bigger issue is foundation and credibility. I cannot just wave around a recording and hope for the best. Emeka almost smiled despite himself. No theatrics, controlled, Sohn said. That is the goal. They moved to a quieter alcove near a tall window overlooking the street below. Sohn lowered his voice. Here is what I want to do. I am going to cross-examine Chisholm hard, not about everything, but about timing, access, and motive. I want her comfortable enough to keep lying. Then I will move toward Chukwudi. Emeka's expression hardened. My brother will not crack easily. Maybe not, Sohn said, but he does not know what we have. Men like Chukwudi get careless when they think they are the smartest person in the room. Emeka looked at the phone again. And if the judge refuses the recording? Then we use it to pressure the witness or to impeach if they deny specific statements. It is still leverage. Emeka was silent for a moment. Then he said, I want the court to know Ada found this. Sohn turned sharply. Do you? Emeka met his gaze. She deserves that much. Sohn nodded slowly, but his face stayed cautious. And then what? Chisholm's attorney will say she was coached. That she misunderstood. That you involved a child in your defense strategy. I did not. I know you did not, Sohn said. But truth and argument are not always the same thing in a courtroom. You know that. Emeka looked away. That was the cruel arithmetic of the day. Ada had done the bravest thing of anyone involved, and the legal system might still try to turn her courage into a tactical liability. The side door to the courtroom opened, and Valerie stepped into the corridor, conferring quietly with Chukwudi. She did not notice Emeka and Sohn at first. Chukwudi did. His eyes flicked toward them. Then, seeing the phone in Emeka's hand, he frowned, only slightly, barely visible, but enough. Emeka straightened. Chukwudi said something to Valerie. Then he walked toward them with an ease Emeka recognized from childhood. Chukwudi had always approached conflict like a man entering a party he expected to enjoy. Emeka, he said lightly. Quite a morning. Emeka's voice was flat. You should leave while you still can. Chukwudi gave a short laugh. If you had handled the divorce privately, none of this would have happened. Emeka felt the anger move through him, cold and precise. You betrayed your own brother. Chikuti's face did not change. Your marriage was already finished before I arrived. Son said, that is enough. But Emeka was not looking at Son. He was looking at his brother and thinking of all the years behind them, their mother's funeral, the first loan Emeka had given him, every second chance mistaken for love. Chikuti's gaze dropped briefly to the phone in Emeka's hand. Something unreadable flickered there. Then he smiled again, too casually. Whatever you think you have, be careful. Court does not work the way you want it to. Emeka stepped closer. No, he said quietly. But truth does. For the first time, Chikuti's expression shifted, only a little, only enough for Emeka to know the hit had landed. Valerie appeared at Chikuti's side and touched his arm. The judge is returning. Chikuti held Emeka's gaze for one more second, then walked back toward the courtroom. Son watched him go. He noticed the phone. Good, Emeka said. Son turned to him. You are angry. Emeka let out a breath through his nose. That obvious? Yes. Good, Son said. Use that carefully. Anger in a courtroom is expensive. Emeka nodded once. The bailiff called everyone back inside. As they returned to the courtroom, Emeka saw Ada just inside the rear doors with Mama Ngozi. She was not supposed to be there yet, but somehow she had made her way closer. She stood very still, her face solemn, her eyes on him. He held up the phone slightly. A single signal. I have it. Ada gave the smallest nod. Then Justice Adesanya took the bench again, and the room settled into expectation. Son opened his file, slid a blank page to the top of his pad, and leaned toward Emeka. This next part matters, he murmured. Emeka looked across the aisle at Chisholm and Chikuti taking their seats. I know. What neither Chisholm nor Chikuti seemed to understand yet was that their case no longer belonged to the story they had prepared. Because now the truth was no longer hidden in a hallway. It was in the courtroom with them. Justice Adesanya adjusted the papers in front of her and looked over the courtroom with the steady patience of someone who had seen too many people mistake confidence for innocence. Counsel, she said. You may proceed. Son rose slowly. My lord, he said, before I continue with cross-examination, the defense requests permission to recall Mrs. Okonkwo to the stand. Valerie stood immediately. On what basis? Son turned, composed as ever. On the basis that I have additional questions directly bearing on the credibility of her testimony. Valerie's lips tightened, but Justice Adesanya merely nodded. Mrs. Okonkwo may return to the stand. Chisholm rose with graceful reluctance and moved back to the witness chair. She sat with excellent posture, lifted one hand to smooth her hair, and arranged her face into quiet endurance. Son approached slowly. Mrs. Okonkwo, he began, you testified this morning that you discovered your husband's alleged affair and then filed for divorce because of his betrayal. Is that correct? Yes. You also testified that you were blindsided by his behavior. Yes. And you had no romantic involvement with any other person during the marriage. Chisholm did not hesitate. That is correct. Son nodded as though satisfied. Let us talk about timing. Your husband filed for divorce first. Correct. And only after he filed did you accuse him of infidelity. I accused him when I had reason to believe it was true. Of course, Son said. Now, did you at any point discuss the financial consequences of those accusations with Mr. Chikuti Okonkwo? No. Never. Son glanced toward the defense table, then back at Chisholm. Did you ever say, in substance or otherwise, that if the court believed Emeka had cheated, the divorce settlement would crush him? Valerie shot to her feet. Objection. My lord, counsel is testifying and mischaracterizing facts not in evidence. Son stood still. I am asking the witness whether she made the statement. Justice Adesanya considered that for only a moment. Overruled. Answer the question. Chisholm kept her face composed, but Emeka saw it, that tiny pause, barely perceptible, a hitch in the machinery. No, she said. I never said that. Son nodded once. Very well. He turned toward the bench. My lord, at this time, the defense requests permission to introduce rebuttal evidence. Valerie's expression sharpened instantly. On what grounds? Son reached into his inside pocket and removed the phone. The room changed. It happened so subtly that only someone sitting in the middle of it could feel it. A shift of air, a quickening of attention, a stillness with an edge. Chikuti straightened in his chair. Chisholm's face did not move, but the color in it seemed to drain by half a shade. Emeka felt his heart begin to pound, not with panic, but with something harder. Recognition. This was the moment. Sohn held up the old phone. This device contains a recording made inside the Okonkwo compound 2 nights ago. The recording captures a conversation between Mrs. Okonkwo and Mr. Chukwudi Okonkwo discussing the fabrication of the affair allegations currently before this court. The gallery erupted into whispers. Justice Adesanya struck her gavel once. Order. Valerie was already standing. My lord, I object in the strongest possible terms. We have no foundation, no chain of custody, and no authentication of any kind. This is outrageous. Sohn remained calm. The defense is prepared to lay foundation. Justice Adesanya's gaze sharpened. Can you authenticate the voices? Emeka stood. Yes, my lord. Valerie crossed her arms. And the source of the recording? Sohn paused. The question hung for a beat longer than Emeka wanted. Then Sohn answered carefully. It was obtained by a member of the household who overheard the conversation. Valerie rose again. A child, I assume. Sohn said nothing. That was answer enough. Justice Adesanya's eyes moved from Sohn to Emeka, then to Chisholm, then briefly to Chukwudi, who had gone very still. Play it, she said. Valerie objected again, but the judge lifted one hand. I said, play it. Sohn pressed the button. For one terrible, beautiful second, there was only static. Then Chisholm's voice came through the speaker. If the judge believes Emeka cheated, the divorce settlement will crush him. The silence that followed those words was unlike any silence Emeka had ever heard. It was not quiet. It was impact. Then Chukwudi's voice followed. Relax. The fake girlfriend story is solid. Chisholm's eyes closed for half a second. Just half. But Emeka saw it. The recording continued. I still cannot believe that actress agreed to testify. She was expensive, Chukwudi said. But worth it. No one in the room moved. No one even seemed to breathe. Once the court believes Emeka had an affair, Chukwudi went on, his reputation collapses. Investors panic. The board turns against him. And I get half of Okonkwo Holdings, Chisholm said. And I finally get control of the rest. Sohn stopped the recording. The courtroom exploded. Justice Adesanya struck the gavel twice, hard enough that the crack echoed against the panelled walls. Order. Now Valerie was white with fury. My lord, this recording must be excluded. It is prejudicial, improperly obtained, Justice Adesanya said sharply. Sit down, Miss Obi. Valerie froze. The judge turned to Chisholm. Mrs. Okonkwo, did you deny under oath making the statement heard on that recording? Chisholm's lips parted, but no sound came immediately. Valerie stepped closer to the witness stand. Do not answer that without, Miss Obi, Justice Adesanya said, each word colder than the last. Sit down. Valerie Saturday. Chisholm looked at Chukwudi. That was her second mistake. The first had been making the recording. The second was letting the court see exactly where she turned when she was frightened. Justice Adesanya noticed it too. Her attention shifted to Chukwudi. Mr. Okonkwo, she said. You will remain seated. Chukwudi had been halfway to standing. He lowered himself again, slower this time. Sohn spoke with renewed precision. Mrs. Okonkwo, were you engaged in a relationship with your husband's brother during your marriage? Chisholm swallowed. No. Sohn reached toward the defense table. My lord, the defense also moves to introduce photographs taken inside the marital compound on the same date. He handed them to the bailiff, who passed them to the bench. Justice Adesanya studied each one in silence. Then she looked at Chisholm, then at Chukwudi, then back at the photographs. The courtroom seemed to lean forward as one body. Valerie rose once more. These images prove nothing more than proximity. Sohn's voice remained steady. Combined with the recording, they prove conspiracy, motive, and perjury. Emeka looked across the room at his brother. Chukwudi no longer looked amused. He looked furious and afraid. For the first time all day, Emeka felt the balance of power shift with unmistakable force. This was no longer Chisholm's story, no longer Chukwidi's strategy, no longer a carefully staged tale of a betrayed wife and an unfaithful husband. Now it was what it had always been beneath the surface, a fraud. At the back of the courtroom, Emeka caught sight of Ada standing just inside the doorway beside Mama Ngozi. She was very still, very small, her face solemn, her hands folded, watching the adults finally hear what she had heard first. And Emeka understood with a rush of emotion so sharp it nearly hurt that nothing about this day would have turned without her. Justice Adesanya set the photographs down. This court will take a brief recess before determining the next evidentiary step and whether referral for further proceedings is warranted. She looked directly at Chisholm. Mrs. Okonkwo, do not leave this building. Then at Chukwudi, Mr. Okonkwo, that instruction applies to you as well. The gavel came down. Everyone began talking at once, but Emeka no longer heard the noise clearly. He was looking only at Ada, and when she met his gaze from across the courtroom, she gave him the smallest nod, as if to say, I told you. The sound after the gavel was almost louder than the sound before it. Voices burst loose all at once, ricocheting off the panelled walls of Court 4. Reporters leaned toward one another. Spectators turned in their seats. Valerie Obi was already speaking in a fast, furious whisper to Chisholm, while Chukwudi Okonkwo sat rigid beside them, his jaw so tight it seemed carved from stone. Emeka did not move immediately. He remained seated at the defense table, one hand flat against the wood, his pulse still pounding from the recording that had just shifted the ground beneath everyone in the room. Across the courtroom, Ada stood near the back beside Mama Ngozi, small and solemn in the middle of adult chaos. Her face held none of the excitement the reporters seemed to feel, no childish thrill, no prideful grin, only a quiet certainty, as if all she had done was place the truth where it belonged. Sohn leaned toward him. Do not say anything yet, he murmured. Not to them, not to the press. Not even to Chukwudi if he comes near you. Emeka kept his eyes on Ada. I am not sure I trust myself to speak calmly to my brother right now. That makes two of us, Sohn said. Justice Adesanya had disappeared into chambers through the side door, taking the photographs and the old phone with her. The court clerk remained at her station, organizing papers with the expression of someone who knew the afternoon was about to become much longer than expected. Valerie rose first from the plaintiff's table. Chisholm, she said sharply under her breath. What exactly have you done? Chisholm's face had gone pale, but her voice was still controlled. I did not know she was recording us. Chukwudi turned toward her. That is what you are worried about? He snapped. You did not know. Valerie shot him a furious look. Lower your voice. Chukwudi ignored her. You said the child was asleep. Chisholm's composure cracked for the first time. I thought she was. That is your defense? Emeka stood. The movement drew Ada's eyes at once. He walked toward the back of the courtroom, away from the tables, away from the storm still building at the front. Mama Ngozi met him halfway, resting one hand lightly on Ada's shoulder. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Emeka knelt in front of Ada. She looked at him seriously. Did I do it wrong? She asked. The question hit him harder than anything Chisholm or Chukwudi had said all day. Emeka shook his head at once. No, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. No, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong. Ada searched his face. Then why does everyone look angry? Mama Ngozi answered softly before Emeka could. Because sometimes the truth makes guilty people angry. Ada considered that, then nodded once as if it matched what she already suspected. Emeka took both her hands in his. You should have told me sooner, he said gently. I did tell you, Ada replied. He almost laughed. No, I mean before yesterday. She lowered her eyes for a moment. I wanted to be sure. Emeka looked at her, stunned again by the simplicity of it. Sure. At 6 years old, Ada had shown more patience and caution than most adults in the building. He brushed a curl away from her forehead. You were brave. Ada's mouth tightened slightly. I was scared. Emeka felt his throat tighten. That is what brave means. Behind them, the courtroom doors opened and two men in dark suits entered, court investigators. One spoke quietly with the clerk. The other glanced toward Chisholm and Chukwudi. Sohn joined Emeka near the rear benches. Court investigators, he said under his breath. That happened faster than I expected. Emeka straightened. At least the judge is taking it seriously. Sohn gave him a sidelong look. She just heard a recording of perjury and conspiracy in the middle of a contested divorce. Serious is the minimum. At the plaintiff's table, Chisholm had begun to unravel. She no longer looked like the polished, injured wife from that morning. Her eyes were too bright, her breathing too shallow. Valerie stood close beside her, speaking with tightly controlled intensity. Chukwudi, on the other hand, had gone in the opposite direction. He had become quiet. That worried Emeka more. Chukwudi was at his most dangerous when he stopped performing. One of the investigators approached Valerie first, asked a brief question, and was met with visible legal resistance. Then he moved to Chukwudi. Chukwudi stood for one suspended moment. The brothers looked at each other across the room. Years of history passed in that silence. Their mother's funeral, the first loan Emeka had given him, business advice ignored, second chances wasted, every old excuse stripped down to its core. Chukwudi had always believed Emeka's steadiness was weakness, that family loyalty could be stretched forever. Now that belief was cracking in public. The investigator said something low to him. Chukwidi's face hardened. Then, to Emeka's astonishment, Chukwudi walked toward him. Sohn stepped immediately between them. "Not now," he said. Chukwudi barely looked at him. "This is your fault," he said to Emeka. Emeka's expression did not change. "My fault?" "Yes. You always had to be the one in control." Emeka stared at him. "You betrayed your own blood." Chukwidi's jaw flexed. "You were never really generous with me." It was such an old lie, such a cowardly refuge, that Emeka almost felt tired instead of angry. "Whatever helps you sleep," he said quietly. Chukwudi laughed once, bitter and humorless. "You think this is over because of one recording?" Sohn answered this time. "No. It is over because you were foolish enough to tell the truth out loud." Chukwidi's eyes flashed. For a second, Emeka thought he might actually lose control right there in the courtroom. But the investigator stepped forward at once. "Mr. Okonkwo, I need you to remain available." Chukwudi looked from Emeka to Ada. That was the moment Emeka changed, not visibly, not in any way the courtroom would record, but something inside him hardened permanently when his brother's gaze landed on the child. Emeka stepped closer, his voice low and lethal. "You do not look at her again." Chukwudi smirked. But it was weaker now. "She is the one who complicated everything." "No," Emeka said. "You did." Mama Ngozi drew Ada slightly behind her, protective and unmistakably firm. Chukwudi seemed about to respond, but Valerie reached him first and pulled him back toward the plaintiff's table. "Enough," she snapped. "Every word out of your mouth makes this worse." Sohn let out a slow breath. "Well, at least one person on their side still has a functioning mind." Emeka did not answer. He was watching Chisholm now. For the first time all day, she looked directly at Ada. Not with affection, not even with anger, with something more complicated. Fear, perhaps, or shame if she still had enough left for it. Ada noticed the look and pressed a little closer to Mama Ngozi. Emeka knelt again beside Ada. "Do you want to wait outside for a while?" She shook her head. "I want to stay." "Why?" Her answer came without hesitation. "In case they lie again." Emeka closed his eyes briefly. Then he smiled despite everything. "That seems to be a theme with you." Ada almost smiled back. Before either of them could say more, the bailiff called for everyone to return to their places. Justice Adesanya re-entered from chambers carrying the photographs herself. The old phone was in a clear evidence pouch. That detail made the whole thing feel suddenly larger than a divorce, larger than Chisholm, larger than Chukwudi. The judge took a seat and surveyed the room with a face that had lost whatever patience remained from the morning session. "Be seated," she said. The room obeyed instantly. Emeka guided Ada and Mama Ngozi to the rear bench, then returned to the defense table beside Sohn. Justice Adesanya opened a fresh page in the file. "This court has reviewed the rebuttal evidence," she said. "Given the seriousness of what has been presented, I am prepared to hear limited additional testimony on authenticity, chain of possession, and any explanation the plaintiff wishes to offer before I determine the next steps." She looked directly at Chisholm. "Mrs. Okonkwo, I suggest that if there is anything this court needs to hear from you, now would be the time." The silence that followed felt alive. Chisholm slowly rose, and for the first time since the proceedings began, Emeka had no idea what she was about to do. Chisholm Okonkwo rose so slowly it seemed, for a moment, that she might decide against it. The courtroom held its breath. At the defense table, Emeka sat motionless beside Sohn, his eyes fixed on the woman he had once believed he would grow old with. Just hours earlier, Chisholm had looked composed, controlled, almost untouchable. Now something in her posture had changed. The elegant line of her shoulders had gone rigid. One hand rested against the edge of the table as though she needed it for balance. Justice Adesanya watched her without expression. "Mrs. Okonkwo," the judge said, "you may explain the statements heard on that recording." Chisholm swallowed once. Then she lifted her chin. "The recording lacks context." Valerie Obi closed her eyes for half a second, the look of a woman who knew she had been handed the weakest possible answer and was being forced to work with it. Justice Adesanya did not blink. What context, she asked, would justify a discussion of a fake girlfriend and a paid witness? Chisholm's fingers tightened on the table edge. Emeka could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. Chisholm was deciding in real time which version of the truth might still save her. She chose badly. "I was angry," she said. "I said things I did not mean." A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Justice Adesanya lifted one hand and the room fell quiet again. "You did not mean them," the judge repeated. Yet the witness this morning testified to the very scenario described in the recording. Chisholm opened her mouth, then closed it. Valerie rose. "My lord, if I may." "No," Justice Adesanya said sharply. "Your client is speaking." Chisholm glanced at Valerie, then toward Chukwudi. That glance said everything. At the plaintiff's table, Chukwudi sat very still, but Emeka saw the fury gathering in him. He had always hated losing control of a situation. Even as a boy, he had smiled right up until the moment things stopped going his way. Then the temper came. Emeka remembered him at 16, furious because their father had given the car keys to someone else. Their father had called it youthful frustration. Their mother, if she had still been alive, might have called it what it truly was: entitlement. Justice Adesanya looked from Chisholm to Chukwudi and back again. "Mrs. Okonkwo," she said, "did you or did you not arrange for a woman to falsely testify that she had been involved with your husband?" The question landed with a clean brutality. There was no room left in it for elegance. Chisholm's voice, when it came, was thinner. "I never arranged anything personally." Sohn stood immediately. "My lord, I move to strike that as non-responsive." "Granted," Justice Adesanya said. "Answer the question." Chisholm turned toward Valerie again. But Valerie did not rescue her this time. Perhaps she knew there was no rescue left to offer. Finally, Chisholm said quietly, "Chukwudi handled most of it." The entire room shifted toward Chukwudi like iron filings toward a magnet. Chukwudi pushed back his chair and stood. "That is not what happened." Justice Adesanya's face hardened. "Mr. Okonkwo, sit down unless you are called." Chukwudi remained standing for one dangerous second too long. Then he Saturday. But the damage was done. Sohn rose, buttoned his jacket, and approached the center of the courtroom. "My lord," he said. "In light of that statement, the defense requests permission to call Mr. Chukwudi Okonkwo." Valerie stood at once. "My client is not on trial here." Justice Adesanya gave her a look that could have frosted glass. "That remains to be seen." Chukwidi's face darkened. The bailiff swore him in. He took the stand with stiff reluctance, his eyes refusing to go near Emeka. He looked instead at the judge, then at Valerie, then out toward the gallery as if he might still find a friendly face somewhere. There was not one. Sohn took his time reaching the witness stand. "Mr. Okonkwo," he began, "did you tell your sister-in-law that the fake girlfriend story was solid?" Chukwudi did not hesitate. "No." Sohn lifted the evidence pouch containing the phone. "The court has heard the recording. That recording was edited." Valerie closed her eyes again. Sohn's voice remained pleasantly neutral. "Do you have evidence of that?" Chukwudi said nothing. "Did you pay Miss Natasha Ifmain to testify falsely?" "No." Sohn walked to the defense table, picked up a folder, and returned. "In discovery, your financial records show a wire transfer to an entity called IF Consulting 3 days before this action was filed. Coincidence?" Chukwidi's face changed just slightly, but it was enough. Sohn held the page up for the court. The amount transferred was 5 million naira. Valerie shot to her feet. "Objection. We have not had the opportunity to review that document." Sohn did not even look at her. "You had every opportunity. It came from your client's supplemental production last night." Justice Adesanya turned to Valerie. "Sit down." Valerie Saturday. Sohn placed the document on the witness stand rail. "Mr. Okonkwo." Chukwidi's throat moved as he swallowed. It was a business payment. To whom? A consultant. What kind? Chukwidi's silence stretched just long enough to become its own answer. Sohn took one measured step closer. Mr. Okonkwo, is it your testimony that the money was unrelated to Natasha Ifmean? Yes. Sohn nodded as if satisfied. Then he reached for another paper. And would you also like to explain why Miss Ifmean's Victoria Island flat lease application lists you as an emergency contact? For the first time all day, Chukwudi lost the room. It happened in a single flicker, a tightening around the mouth, a brief stunned stare at Sohn, the realization that the path ahead had vanished. The gallery reacted at once. Justice Adesanya struck the gavel for order. Chukwudi leaned back in the witness chair, but the movement looked less like confidence now and more like retreat. Emeka sat perfectly still, though inside him every nerve felt alive. Sohn had him, not emotionally, not morally, but factually. That was always harder to escape. At the rear bench, Ada sat beside Mama Ngozi, watching with wide, solemn eyes. Ada did not understand wire transfers or discovery production or the rules of impeachment, but she understood what was happening. The bad people were no longer speaking with easy smiles. Sohn continued. Mr. Okonkwo, did you engage in an affair with your brother's wife? Valerie rose again. Objection. Justice Adesanya overruled her before she finished the word. Chukwidi's voice came out lower now. That is irrelevant. Sohn tilted his head. It speaks directly to motive. Chukwudi looked toward Chisholm. Chisholm looked down. And in that instant, Emeka knew they were both finished. Not because of the affair itself, not because of the public humiliation, but because the alliance between them had cracked. Conspiracies hold only as long as every conspirator believes silence is safer than blame. Now both of them were calculating survival. Justice Adesanya leaned forward. Answer the question, Mr. Okonkwo. Chukwidi's jaw worked once. Then he said, yes. The courtroom seemed to draw in a single stunned breath. Emeka did not move. He had known. He had heard the recording. He had seen the photographs. And still, hearing the words spoken aloud under oath felt like being struck somewhere old and deep. Yes, one syllable, enough to collapse years of denial. At the back, Ada shifted slightly and looked up at Mama Ngozi, who placed a gentle hand over the child's. Justice Adesanya looked from Chukwudi to Chisholm. Mrs. Okonkwo, she said, do you dispute that testimony? Chisholm closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something in her had gone flat. No. It was almost a whisper, but the courtroom heard it. Emeka looked down at his hands for a strange second. He thought of the first Christmas after he and Chisholm were married. Music low in the living room, Chukwudi laughing over drinks by the window, Ada not yet in his life. The compound still echoing with plans for a future that had seemed possible then. How little any of us know, he thought, about the people sitting at our own table. Justice Adesanya closed the file in front of her with deliberate care. This court will recess for 30 minutes. Upon return, I will address sanctions, referral for further investigation, and the immediate implications for the pending divorce and custody matters. She looked directly at Chisholm and Chukwudi. Neither of you is to leave this building. The gavel came down. The room erupted again, louder than before. But Emeka remained seated, hearing only one thing beneath the noise. The silence after Chukwudi said yes. The silence where denial used to be. When the courtroom emptied again, it felt like the aftermath of a collapse. Reporters spilled into the hallway in a rush of sharpened voices and half-finished headlines. Court officers moved faster now, no longer performing routine order, but containing fallout. Every conversation in the corridor seemed to lower itself when Emeka passed, then rise again the moment he moved on. He barely noticed. He walked straight to the rear bench where Ada and Mama Ngozi were waiting. Ada stood before he reached her. Her eyes searched his face with the same solemn intensity she had carried all day, as if she needed to know whether the adults were finally seeing what she had seen first. Emeka stopped in front of her and for a moment could not speak. He had prepared himself for the humiliation of being lied about in public. He had prepared himself for the business consequences, the photographs, the whispering. He had even prepared himself for Chisholm's performance. He had not prepared himself for the sound of his own brother admitting the affair under oath. Ada reached for his hand first. Did the judge hear everything? She asked. Emeka looked down at her small fingers curling around his. Yes, he said quietly. She heard. Ada nodded once as though confirming an expected result. Good. The simplicity of it nearly broke him. Mama Ngozi placed one hand lightly on Emeka's arm. Sit down before you fall down, she said softly. That almost made him laugh. He sat beside Ada on the bench, elbows on his knees, trying to slow the pounding in his chest. Mama Ngozi remained standing, her gaze moving across the corridor like a sentry who had no intention of letting disaster near the child again. Sohn joined them a minute later, carrying 2 folders and wearing the expression of a man whose mind was already 3 moves ahead. We have momentum, he said quietly. But we are not done. Emeka looked up. I know. Sohn glanced toward Ada, then lowered his voice. The judge is furious. That helps, but fury is not the same thing as a final ruling. We still need to get through the next session cleanly. Emeka nodded. What is Chisholm's side going to do? Sohn exhaled. Damage control. Valerie will try to isolate Chukwudi. Argue that Chisholm was emotionally vulnerable, manipulated, frightened, something along those lines. If she can make Chisholm look weak instead of malicious, she will try. Mama Ngozi let out a sound that was almost a snort. Weak. That woman. Sohn allowed himself the smallest smile. I did not say it was good lawyering. I said she would try. Ada listened to all of this with grave attention. Then she asked, Are they still going to say Daddy is bad? Sohn crouched so he was closer to her level. They may try, he said. But they are not in a very strong position anymore. Ada frowned slightly. Because they got caught. Yes, Sohn said. Because they got caught. At the far end of the corridor, a cluster of reporters surged suddenly toward a side door. Chisholm emerged with Valerie. Flashbulbs popped. Microphones lifted. Questions struck the air from all directions. Mrs. Okonkwo, did you fabricate testimony? Did you conspire with your brother-in-law? Did your daughter discover the evidence? Chisholm flinched at that last question. Emeka saw it from across the hall. For the first time all day, she looked less like a strategist and more like someone cornered by consequences she had not imagined would ever fully arrive. Valerie pulled her forward without stopping. Chukwudi followed several steps behind, escorted by one of the investigators, his expression cold now. No charm, no smoothness, only fury directed at whoever had pulled the curtain back. When his eyes found Emeka, they held there. Then they shifted to Ada. Emeka rose at once. The movement was immediate enough that Sohn stepped in front of him instinctively. But Emeka did not advance. He simply stood between Chukwudi and the bench where Ada sat today. Chukwudi saw that, and for a long second neither brother looked away. Emeka thought with a clarity that surprised him that some relationships do not end in arguments. They end in recognition. In finally seeing what has always been there. Chukwidi's mouth moved into the faintest mockery of a smile. Then the investigator directed him toward the opposite hallway, and he disappeared from view. Only after he was gone did Emeka sit again. Mama Ngozi said quietly, You did right. Emeka stared at the floor. I should have seen him clearly years ago. Maybe, Mama Ngozi said, but that is not the same as causing this. He knew she was right. It did not make the thought disappear. Ada leaned lightly against his arm. Dad. Yes. Are you angry at me for recording them? Emeka turned so quickly that she blinked. Angry at you? She nodded. You looked sad. For a second, he could not answer. Then he took her hand again. I am sad because people I trusted did ugly things, he said gently. I am not sad because of you. Ada seemed to think this over very carefully. Then she said, I did not want them to win. Emeka felt his throat tighten. They did not, he said. Not anymore. A court officer appeared and informed counsel that proceedings would resume in 10 minutes. Sohn stood, adjusted his tie, and looked down at Emeka. I need to speak with the clerk and make sure the chain of custody issue is fully covered when we go back in. Emeka nodded. Sohn hesitated, then looked at Ada. You did something very important today. Ada's face remained serious. Because they lied. Yes, Sohn said. Because they lied. After he left, the corridor grew quieter around them. Some of the spectators had wandered off. Others remained, pretending not to stare at the child everyone now seemed to understand was at the center of the day. Emeka noticed the attention and instinctively moved closer to Ada. Mama Ngozi noticed too. People always like courage more when they are safely watching it from a distance, she murmured. Emeka gave her a tired look. You always have a saying for everything. Comes with age, she said. That loosened something in him. Not enough for laughter, but enough for breath. The second session began with less theatre and more gravity. The atmosphere had changed completely. The earlier appetite for scandal had been replaced by the sharper focus that follows real damage. Even the reporters seemed to understand that this was no longer merely a society divorce with a salacious twist. It was possible perjury, fraud, and conspiracy. Justice Adesanya entered with a file thicker than before, and the old phone still sealed in the evidence pouch. Be seated, she said. Everyone obeyed at once. Emeka sat at the defense table with Sohn beside him. Chisholm and Chukwudi sat across the aisle, but the resemblance to the morning session ended there. Chisholm looked worn now, as though the effort of maintaining a false version of herself had drained the colour from her. Chukwudi looked furious and dangerous in the particular way of men forced to sit still while consequences gather around them. Justice Adesanya folded her hands. This court has heard sworn testimony that directly contradicts evidence introduced during these proceedings. I will now address the status of the matter before me. Valerie rose immediately. My lord, before the court takes any action, the plaintiff requests an opportunity to amend. No, Justice Adesanya said. The single word landed like a door shutting. Valerie tried again. My lord, Mrs. Okonkwo has been under extreme emotional strain. Justice Adesanya leaned forward. Miss Obi, your client presented fabricated testimony, concealed a conspiracy relevant to the division of marital assets, and appears to have used this court as a stage for a fraudulent claim. Do not insult me with the phrase emotional strain. The courtroom went perfectly still. Justice Adesanya continued. With respect to the divorce action, I am striking the infidelity allegations against Mr. Emeka Okonkwo from the record pending formal review of sanctions. With respect to the property issues, I am referring the financial and testimonial irregularities to the appropriate authorities. She turned toward Chukwudi. And with respect to Mr. Chukwudi Okonkwo, I am ordering the transcript and evidence forwarded for investigation into perjury, witness tampering, and any related misconduct. Chukwudi's chair scraped the floor as he rose half an inch before sitting back down again. Valerie put a restraining hand on his sleeve. Justice Adesanya then looked to the rear bench where Ada sat beside Mama Ngozi. Her voice changed slightly, not softer, but human. And before this court adjourns, there is one more matter. Emeka followed her gaze. He knew before the judge spoke the child's name that whatever came next would stay with Ada the rest of her life. Justice Adesanya's gaze remained fixed on the rear bench. Would you bring Ada Okonkwo forward, please, she said. A murmur passed through the courtroom. Valerie Obi closed her eyes briefly as if one more indignity had just been added to a day already beyond saving. Chisholm stiffened in her chair. Chukwudi went cold and expressionless, the look of a man trying to disappear without physically moving. At the defense table, Emeka turned halfway in his seat. Ada looked up at Mama Ngozi first. Mama Ngozi gave a small nod. Then Ada stood. Emeka was on his feet before he realized he had moved. Justice Adesanya noticed. Mr. Okonkwo, she said. You may accompany her. Thank you, my lord. Emeka crossed the room to meet Ada near the aisle. She slipped her hand into his without hesitation, and together they walked toward the bench. The image would be in tomorrow's papers. He knew it already. The billionaire and the child. But that was no longer what mattered. What mattered was the weight of her small fingers in his hand. What mattered was the fact that she had walked into a day built by liars and somehow left it more honest than she found it. When they reached the front, Ada stood beside him and looked up at the judge. Justice Adesanya removed her glasses. It was a simple gesture, but it changed the whole atmosphere of the room. Less distance, less bench, more person. Ada, she said, do you understand where you are? Yes, And do you understand that today, because of what you brought forward, this court heard evidence that might otherwise have remained hidden? Ada glanced at Emeka for one quick second, then back at the judge. Yes, Justice Adesanya studied her carefully. Why did you record that conversation? The courtroom went so still that Emeka could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights. Ada answered without drama. Because they were lying about my daddy. The judge nodded once. And why did that matter to you? Ada's voice stayed small but clear. Because he is good. Something moved through the room then. Not noise. Not speech. Something quieter and more dangerous to harden people. feeling. Justice Adesanya asked, "Did anyone tell you to make that recording?" "No, Did your father ask you to help him in this case?" Ada shook her head at once. "No." Justice Adesanya looked at Emeka, then back at Ada. "So this was your own idea?" "Yes, The judge's expression softened, though only slightly. "Do you know what courage is?" Ada thought about it. "A little." A faint smile touched the corners of Justice Adesanya's mouth. "Would you like me to tell you what I think it is?" Ada nodded. "Courage," Justice Adesanya said, "is telling the truth when the truth is the hardest thing in the room." For the first time all day, Ada smiled. It was a small smile, almost private. Emeka felt it like sunlight breaking through a storm he had forgotten could end. Justice Adesanya leaned back. "You may return to your seat in a moment," she said. "But before you do, I want the record to reflect that this child's actions were not manipulative, theatrical, or improper in spirit. They were the actions of a child who saw dishonesty and tried, in the only way she knew how, to protect a parent she loves." She paused. Many adults in this room could learn from that. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. Chisholm's face had gone still in a different way now, not controlled, emptied. Emeka looked at her and saw perhaps for the first time the full cost of what she had done. Not the legal cost, not the financial one. The moral one. She had not only betrayed a husband. She had betrayed the faith of a child. Justice Adesanya replaced her glasses. "As to the practical matters before the court," she said, her tone shifting back into formal authority, "I am entering a temporary order recognizing Mr. Emeka Okonkwo as the sole custodial parent pending final disposition. All prior insinuations regarding his alleged infidelity are stricken from consideration at this stage." Valerie rose automatically. "My lord, with respect." "No," Justice Adesanya said. "With respect is exactly what your side has lacked today." Valerie Saturday. The judge continued. "Mrs. Okonkwo's access to the child will be supervised until this court has further reviewed the extent to which she involved family resources, household access, or personal relationships in the conduct now before me." That hit Chisholm harder than the public humiliation had. She stood abruptly. "My lord, I would never hurt Ada." Justice Adesanya looked at her with open disbelief. "You already have." Chisholm froze. A silence followed that no one in the courtroom seemed willing to interrupt. Emeka felt Ada's fingers tighten around his. Justice Adesanya turned a page. "The matter of financial distribution will proceed on revised terms after referral review. This court will not reward a manufactured scandal. Mr. Okonkwo's counsel may submit a motion for fees and sanctions within 10 business days." Sohn inclined his head. "Thank you, my lord." Chikwudi spoke then, unable to help himself. "This is absurd." Every head turned. Justice Adesanya's face chilled. "Mr. Okonkwo, the only reason you are not leaving this courtroom in handcuffs is that procedure takes longer than your arrogance." Even Sohn, who valued restraint more than almost anything, had no immediate response to that. Chikwudi sat back slowly. Emeka could see in his brother's face the exact instant where entitlement became fear. Justice Adesanya looked once more at Emeka and Ada. "Mr. Okonkwo," she said, "you may take your daughter home." The words landed with a force Emeka had not expected. Home. After weeks of accusations, strategy meetings, leaked photographs, and whispered damage control, the simplest victory in the world was the right to take his child home. His voice came out low. "Thank you, my lord." He turned slightly toward Ada. "We are done," he whispered. She looked up at him as if making sure she had heard correctly. "Done for today," he said, and smiled. That finally did it. The 6-year-old's face softened, and the first real relief he had seen in her all day appeared in her eyes. Emeka bent and lifted her into his arms. She wrapped both arms around his neck at once. The courtroom watched in silence. No one with any decency left in them could mistake that embrace for performance. At the plaintiff's table, Chisholm looked away. Emeka held Ada a moment longer than he needed to. Then he turned and carried her back down the aisle. Mama Ngozi met them halfway. One hand pressed briefly to her mouth before she gathered herself again. Sohn followed with his files, his expression still disciplined, though Emeka could see the satisfaction beneath it. As they moved toward the exit, Ada murmured against Emeka's shoulder, soft enough that only he could hear, "Daddy, yes. I told you I would defend you." Emeka closed his eyes for 1 second. "I know," he said. "And you did." Outside the courthouse, Lagos had already turned the story into weather. The heat hit first, then the flash of cameras, then the voices. "Mr. Okonkwo, did your wife fabricate the affair? Does your daughter know she provided the key evidence? Mrs. Okonkwo, do you have a statement?" Emeka stepped through the courthouse doors with Ada still in his arms, Mama Ngozi at his side, and Sohn just half a step behind them. The afternoon sky was the pale white of Harmattan season, and the dry wind moved through the Victoria Island streets carrying noise, heat, and the restless appetite of the city. For one brief second, Emeka considered turning around. But Ada's arms were looped around his neck, and her cheek rested against his shoulder with the exhausted trust of a child who had been brave for too many hours in a row. So he kept walking. Sohn moved ahead first, one hand raised toward the cluster of reporters. "No statements at this time," he said evenly. "Please give them space." That did not stop the questions. They came faster, louder, more desperate, as though truth were only valuable if it could be turned into tonight's headline before sunset. Emeka hated that part of the world. He had spent years learning how to live with press coverage, investor scrutiny, and the strange predatory interest that followed wealth. But this was different. It was no longer only his reputation under public light. It was Ada. And the sight of camera lenses turning toward the child in his arms awakened something old and primal in him, something deeper than anger and cleaner than fear. He stopped at the roadside and shifted Ada slightly, shielding her face against his shoulder. A reporter stepped forward anyway, her voice sharper than the rest. "Mr. Okonkwo, can you confirm that your daughter uncovered the scheme?" Emeka turned his head just enough to answer. "My daughter is 6 years old," he said, his voice low but carrying. "She is not part of your story." The woman froze. So did several others. Mama Ngozi stood beside him like a second wall, her hand resting lightly against Ada's back. She did not look at the press. She looked only at the road, watching for the car. Ada stirred slightly. "Daddy." "Yes, sweetheart. Are we really going home?" He tightened his hold on her. "Yes." She was quiet for a second. Then she whispered, "Good." The car pulled up at last. Sohn opened the rear door himself. Emeka slid into the back seat with Ada still in his arms, and Mama Ngozi climbed in beside them. By the time the door shut, cutting off the noise of reporters and traffic, Emeka felt as though someone had sealed them inside a smaller, safer world. The driver pulled away from the curb. For several blocks, no one spoke. The city moved past in familiar fragments, road stalls, okadas weaving through traffic, tall buildings throwing long shadows in the afternoon light. The ordinary machinery of Lagos continuing without pause, indifferent to human ruin and relief alike. Ada finally lifted her head from Emeka's shoulder. "Is Mummy coming home?" The question entered the car softly, but it changed the air at once. Emeka looked out the window before answering. Children always knew how to find the one question adults wished they could postpone. "No," he said gently. "Not today." "Because of court?" "Yes." Ada leaned back against him again. She lied. Emeka glanced down at her. "Yes." "Why?" There it was again. That question. Simple. Impossible. The one that had threaded through the whole day and would not leave because it had no clean answer. Emeka chose honesty over comfort. "Because sometimes people want something so badly," he said, "they start telling themselves that the truth is the problem." Ada thought about that. Then she asked, "Did Uncle Chukwudi do that too?" Emeka looked at his hands. "Yes." Mama Ngozi's voice came quietly from beside them. "That is what greed does, my child. It makes people believe they are owed what was never theirs." Ada nodded slowly, absorbing it with the grave concentration that always made her seem older than 6. When they reached the compound on the island, the late afternoon light had already begun to fade. The familiar iron gate, the clean courtyard, the front door with its heavy brass handles, none of it had ever looked more comforting to Emeka. Home. The word meant something different now than it had that morning. Inside, the compound smelled faintly of Mama Ngozi's cooking, egusi soup left simmering on the stove before they left for court. The quiet here felt warm instead of tense, earned instead of empty. Emeka set Ada down in the foyer. She looked around as if confirming that the walls were still theirs, that safety had not somehow been repossessed while they were gone. Then she looked up at him. "Can I change into my comfortable clothes even if it is not night time?" Emeka smiled for the first time since leaving the courtroom. Yes. I think that is an excellent legal strategy. That earned a tiny smile from her. Mama Ngozi touched Ada's shoulder. Come on, child. Let us get you comfortable. As they started toward the staircase, Ada turned back. Daddy, yes. You are coming too, right? The question was not really about stairs or clothing. Emeka understood that. I will be right behind you. She seemed satisfied and disappeared upstairs with Mama Ngozi. The silence that followed was different from the silence in his office the night before. Last night, it had been full of dread. Tonight, it was full of aftermath. Sohn remained in the foyer, briefcase in hand. We need to talk, he said quietly. Emeka nodded toward the sitting room. A few minutes later, they sat with 2 untouched glasses of water between them. Legal folders spread open again. Emeka knew that consequences did not pause simply because feelings were exhausted. Sohn removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Well, he said, there are still several fires burning, but they are not burning in our house anymore. Emeka exhaled. What happens next? Sohn leaned back. Best case, Chisholm side retreats, agrees to revise terms, and tries to salvage whatever remains of her public dignity. Worst case, Valerie throws every procedural argument she can at the judge's orders, and Chukwudi starts making desperate decisions. Emeka's expression hardened. Could he? Sohn gave him a careful look. People who lose power quickly sometimes confuse desperation with strategy. Emeka stared toward the darkened window. And Chisholm. Sohn was quiet for a moment. I think Chisholm finally realized the difference between manipulation and consequence. Emeka almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. She looked at Ada in court. I saw. Emeka's jaw tightened. I will never forgive that. Sohn did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost some of its courtroom precision. You do not have to decide forgiveness today. No, Emeka thought. Not today. Maybe not ever. Footsteps came softly from the stairs. Ada appeared in the doorway of the sitting room wearing a soft tracksuit covered in little gold stars. Her hair had been loosened and replaited by Mama Ngozi. Without the courthouse, without the tension, without the adults' lies around her, she looked suddenly and unmistakably like what she was, a child. Emeka's heart ached at the sight. Sohn stood at once. I will leave you both to rest, he said. Emeka rose too and shook his hand. You helped save me in there, he said. Sohn glanced toward Ada. No, he said quietly. She did. After Sohn left, Emeka crossed the room and opened his arms. Ada came straight into them. He lifted her easily and carried her into the kitchen where Mama Ngozi was ladling soup into bowls. The table had been set with thick napkins, warm bread rolls, and the kind of simple order that made pain survivable. No one spoke much during dinner. They did not need to. Ada ate slowly at first, then with real hunger. Mama Ngozi asked if she wanted extra bread. Ada did. Emeka watched her take another spoonful and felt a kind of gratitude so sharp it was almost indistinguishable from grief. After dinner, he carried her upstairs and tucked her into bed himself. The room glowed softly with lamplight. The stuffed rabbit she had had since she was a toddler lay against the pillow. Outside the window, Victoria Island glittered in the dark. Ada looked up at him as he pulled the blanket to her chin. Daddy. Yes. Did I really help? Emeka sat on the edge of the bed. He thought of the courtroom falling silent when the recording played. He thought of Chukwudi saying yes. He thought of Justice Adesanya telling him he could take his daughter home. Then he looked at Ada. You told the truth, he said. And sometimes that changes everything. She seemed to think that over. Then she asked one final question. Are we okay now? Emeka brushed a thumb gently over her forehead. We are together, he said. That is how I know we will be okay. Her eyes drifted closed a few moments later. Emeka stayed beside her longer than usual, listening to the slow rhythm of her breathing until the day finally loosened its grip on both of them. When he rose and walked to the window, he could see his reflection in the glass. Tired. Older than yesterday. Changed, but not broken. On the nightstand behind him sat the old phone in a clear evidence sleeve, returned temporarily by the court clerk for counsel review before formal processing in the morning. Such an ordinary thing. A scratch case, a fading battery, a child's forgotten device. And yet it had carried the truth when adults would not. Emeka looked back at Ada sleeping under her Gold Star blanket and thought of the words she had spoken in his office, almost as if she had been making a promise to both of them. "I will defend my daddy in court." She had. And as he turned off the lamp and stood for one last second in the doorway, Emeka understood something he would carry for the rest of his life. Family was never about blood. Not really. It was about who stood beside you when the lie was loudest. The compound went quiet around him. Downstairs, Mama Ngozi moved gently through the kitchen, putting away the dishes. Outside, the city kept roaring toward tomorrow. And upstairs, in a little room inside the family home on Victoria Island, the child he had chosen slept safely under his roof. For the first time in many weeks, Emeka Okonkwo believed that tomorrow might belong to the truth. This story reminds us that truth and courage are not measured by age, power, or wealth. Sometimes the smallest voice in the room carries the greatest strength. Ada did not have lawyers, influence, or authority. She only had honesty and love for her father. Yet that was enough to expose deception and restore justice. The lesson for all of us is simple but powerful. When people choose truth over fear and loyalty over betrayal, even the most carefully built lies will eventually fall apart. Real family is not defined by blood or appearances, but by those who stand beside you when your reputation, dignity, and future are under attack. Thank you for watching this story on Zara Tales. If it moved you, like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one.